I want to make money betting on the NFL in 2020, but who really has the best team in the NFC South? How do I bet on the Panthers, Falcons, Buccaneers, and Saints? I need information I can use from week 1 through the playoffs. Welcome back to aosportspicks TV. I'm Alpha Omega. Now that we have a few weeks of the 2020 NFL season in the books, there's enough statistical data from 2020 to put out videos giving fairly accurate projections for each team throughout the rest of the season, as well as the playoffs. This video covers every team in the NFC South. And for all of you who are new to the channel or new to the sports betting game, the NFC South is the Carolina Panthers, the Atlanta Falcons, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the New Orleans Saints. This video is one part of a playlist providing season updates on every team in the NFL. I designed the entire playlist to be useful from now through the end of the season. So it doesn't matter when you find these videos, you can still use them to make money. Once you finish this video, you can find the playlist by clicking the link in the pinned comment or in the description. I recommend you watch the whole playlist more than once because I'm putting a lot of information into each one of these videos. I also have timestamps in the progress bar and in the description so you can easily choose what you want to watch. After watching, you'll have more knowledge than your friends, you'll be able to create smarter DFS lineups, and most importantly to me, you can start making winning bets from now all the way through the championship. Just to put into perspective how big sports betting is becoming, according to Hannah Ziotti at CNN Business, sports betting was already booming in the United States before the situation hit, after the U.S. Supreme Court in 2018 cleared the way for it to be legalized in states outside Nevada. While lockdowns severely disrupted large sports events, the months-long shutdown of casinos helped boost demand for online gambling. The American Gaming Association expects nearly 35 million people, or 13% of American adults, to bet on the NFL this season. All right, let's get started. Firstly, the NFL is an incredibly tough market that is notoriously difficult to succeed in year over year. This is how I've managed to win over the last few years. What I do is I take all of the information gathered from before the season started, meaning all the injuries, the trades, free agency, coaching changes, the draft, roster construction, all of the statistical data from 2019, and quite a bit more than that to start making 2020 week-by-week predictions. Then I take the 2020 play-by-play statistical data from the weeks that have already been played to help determine where my projections are correct and where my projections are wrong for the upcoming week. Then I look for the best number from a list of every major sportsbook on whichever games I feel give me the best opportunity to make money. Finally, I do my best to get as much money down on those games as possible. My goal is to give you enough information to do the same thing. Having said that, let's get started. The Carolina Panthers are obviously the team with the least amount of talent in the NFC South. Don't tell that to the Falcons, but that's not surprising for Carolina, considering this team is the definition of a rebuilding franchise. Carolina has a totally new regime. I mean, they completely clean house. A new owner, a new head coach, new offensive and defensive coordinators, and even a new quarterback. This is a team with a bunch of new pieces that have never been together. But unlike the New York Giants, the New York Jets, and other rebuilding teams, there are plenty of reasons to be optimistic about the future. According to Dean Jones of Fansided, nobody likes change, and no organization has gone through more of that this offseason. Longtime head coach Ron Rivera was fired at the back end of 2019 and replaced by Matt Rule, with a big reputation in college for turning around struggling programs. Given how young and inexperienced Carolina's roster actually is going into the campaign, things might get worse before they get better. But if they can develop, show promise, and learn as they go, it should stand them in good stead in their pursuit of reaching the playoffs once again in the near future. Having said that, Carolina's leaders on both sides of the ball are gone. Cam Newton is in New England looking like a man on a mission. And on the other side of the ball, linebacker Luke Kuechly retired. In fact, 8 out of 11 defensive spots have turned over, and that's easily the most change of any team in the NFL. New offensive coordinator Joe Brady was a revelation at LSU, and he was probably a big part of the success with the Saints before that. Overall, I'm more excited about him than head coach Matt Rule. And based on Rule deciding to take a hands-off role with the offense and letting Brady work, this is a good thing both in the short and long term. From Roto Street Journal's The Wolf, unlike many coordinators who stubbornly force players to fit within a specific scheme, Brady wisely builds around his team's strengths. In fact, he scoffed at the notion of doing otherwise. Everybody talks about a West Coast system, about a spread system. Our system is going to be what our players do best, Brady detailed. It's all about a vision you have for your players. Each person on the roster on your offense, you should have a vision for, and they all have to play a role. When you can find guys that fit the vision and understand their role, that's when you have success. After the disaster that was the Panthers' 2019 season, Carolina tried to start fresh from a team-building perspective. They tried to address the quarterback void left by Cam Newton, went to college to find their coaches, then drafted exclusively defensive players. Big picture, all these decisions tell me that the Panthers know that they aren't going to be competitive for a couple years at least. They want to take some shots and see if they can put together a team that can grow into a contender over the years. Maybe even get a quarterback next year depending on their draft position. When discussing the quarterback position, which also means discussing the future of the organization, the question is whether or not Teddy Bridgewater is better than a bottom 10 quarterback in the NFL. I think the answer is yes, he is, but just barely. Teddy's not a bad quarterback, but he's also not nearly good enough. D-Belt of SB Nation Carolina describes the typical Bridgewater performance. In LA, Teddy had a solid though uninspiring stat line. Almost 80% completion rate, 235 yards passing, a touchdown, 0 turnovers. This week, I doubt that performance will be enough to get away with a win. I like Bridgewater, and I think it's a great story how far he's come back since the injury. But Teddy's ceiling just isn't that high. And if you want to point to his success with the Saints, in 2019 his lack of overall ability was covered up by playing for a really good team. If you rewatch Teddy's starts for New Orleans, he wasn't doing anything special, and they were all boring to watch because the Saints weren't doing that much on offense. The team was just one of the best in football. Now the Saints have weapons everywhere, and when you don't have to play from behind, you don't have to do anything spectacular. You can just go out there and score 24 points because you have such an insane offense. So it's not surprising that Teddy racked up a few victories last year. Now the good news for Panthers fans is that Teddy Bridgewater is a great quarterback if you're trying to tank. With Teddy, you know what you're getting. And as a franchise with a bunch of new and young pieces, you want a guy who can set the tone of this is how you act as a pro. And because of that, I think owner David Tepper did a great job and they picked the right guy. From Schuyler Callahan at SI.com, tanking can be a risky decision. And when you do it, you better be darn sure you've got it right. Personally, tanking should only be considered an option for a once-in-a-generation type of player. Unfortunately, the league seems to have teams taking this route every year for the top quarterback who may not even be a Pro Bowl caliber player. However, Trevor Lawrence is that guy. The confusion here is the Panthers go out and get deep threat Robbie Anderson. And while Anderson is good, deep passes are not Teddy's game. Because of that, expect Anderson's overall stock to go down, because he doesn't have a quarterback that's willing to take risks down the field. So looking at the offense in 2020, Carolina has a low-end quarterback, a new offensive line taking on new roles with no continuity. Tight end Greg Olsen is gone, so Carolina has to break in a new tight end, which generally takes at least a year. Panthers' former first-round pick receiver DJ Moore is not producing at the level of his draft position. And like I said, Carolina signs Robbie Anderson, which doesn't fit the skill set of their quarterback. So the real question is, why did they sign a running back to be the face of the franchise? That was a screw-up, regardless of how you feel about McCaffrey as a player. The fact that McCaffrey is out for 4 to 6 weeks with an ankle reinforces my point. That kind of money long-term for a running back is rarely, if ever, a smart decision. Looking at recent history, it hasn't proven to be good. Look at Todd Gurley, or Le'Veon Bell, or even Zeke Elliott, in my opinion, which are all bad signings that have hurt their respective teams. What you want to do is trade a guy like that for more draft capital. Dean Jones at Fansided makes the point. At a time where NFL teams appeared reluctant to pay running backs their going rate due to their short shelf life, McCaffrey bucked the trend with a bumper 4-year, $64 million deal with a $21 million signing bonus and $38 million guaranteed. The NFL's illustrious history is full of big running back contracts that were nothing short of a disaster. One only has to look at the money given to Todd Gurley during his time with the Los Angeles Rams to see that. Click the link at the top of the screen to see my season update for the LA Rams and how terrible that Gurley contract really is for the team long term. Now, if you're a Christian McCaffrey stan, you could argue that because McCaffrey is such a big part of the passing game, comparing him to Gurley isn't fair, which is partially true. But there's also no way to justify that type of contract for a running back. It speaks to the inexperience of the owner and the GM. Now, at least McCaffrey has game-breaking athleticism, and his receiving skills pair well with Bridgewater's strength, but it's just a bad move. No way to justify it, and I'm trying to because I like McCaffrey. He was a huge part of the team early in 2019, but towards the end, there was some obvious wear and tear on his body. It's pretty clear just based on the amount of the offensive load he was asked to carry down the stretch. It's stupid to give him that number of carries and expect your star player to hold up. Looking at the ankle injury he's now dealing with, it makes no sense to waste him like that, which brings us back full circle. Why are the Panthers giving a running back a $64 million deal? According to Candace Martino at WBTW Carolina, the Carolina Panthers have rewarded Christian McCaffrey for his production and versatility, making him the highest paid running back in the NFL. It appeared to be a matter of when, not if, the extension was coming after Panthers coach Matt Rule made it clear last week that he viewed McCaffrey as a vital part of the franchise moving forward. I think Christian McCaffrey is a centerpiece player that you can build around, Rule said, and I think he really builds to the culture that you want to have within the building. That points out the only good part of giving McCaffrey that contract. Shelling out that kind of money for a highly productive, mostly reliable player may have communicated to the younger players that if you do your job and you play well, this is a team that will reward you for it, which creates a culture where the team isn't just squeezing out every bit of a player's prime years and then throwing them in the trash when the organization doesn't feel like paying up. Houston Texans. Another point against the McCaffrey signing is how well his backup Mike Davis has played in his stead. Davis is a fifth-year pro and a former fourth-round pick who has played at an incredibly high level in McCaffrey's place, becoming an important part of the Panther offense. That's great for him, but Davis's success speaks more to why no team should ever give a running back big money. They just don't last long enough, and there's so much running back talent coming into the league every year that it's almost always smarter to trade that player and find a replacement. From Roto World, it's not hyperbole to call Davis one of the 10 best running backs right now. He came into the week leading the NFL in broken tackles per carry, and Davis won't move down after today's elite performance. Davis is great between the tackles and has finesse as a checkdown artist too. It'd be sad to see Davis crawl back into a near useless role when CMC returns, but that's the most likely case. Carolina was 3-0 with McCaffrey hobbled. Moving briefly to the defense, obviously with a rebuilding franchise, there are major holes in the Panthers' pass D, and also some major questions about how Carolina is going to generate a pass rush. Some of the offseason investments should help stop the run to a degree, but like we've seen so far in 2020, teams are going to score on Carolina. And it does the Panthers no favors that they happen to be in a division where there are 3 of the league's top 10 quarterbacks. According to John D. Shazier at NewOrleansSaints.com, this season will be known as the one in which the NFC South division arguably boasted the best ever collection of quarterbacks. There never has been a more accomplished group of quarterbacks, with New Orleans' Drew Brees, Tampa Bay's Tom Brady, and Atlanta's Matt Ryan open a season in the same division. Playing those quarterbacks twice apiece is not great, especially with the Panthers' weak pass defense. Carolina will be playing from behind in a lot of games, and because of that, we all will learn a lot about how good of a coach Matt Rule really is, and how good Joe Brady is as an offensive coordinator. If those two can manifest something with Teddy as quarterback, it's going to be really impressive moving forward. It's still too early in the 2020 season to make a decision on that either way, but even without McCaffrey, the Panthers have looked much better than expected. However, the fact that Carolina is instituting an entirely new system with so many new parts spells an enormous amount of trouble for the team in 2020. Some final thoughts on the Panthers. While the injury to Christian McCaffrey is not good for Carolina short term, I think it's the best thing that could have happened for the team long term. If McCaffrey was healthy, we all know the entire offense would be running through him. And what is the point of overusing him, running him 20 times a game, when you're going to end up a 6-7 win team tops? His contract doesn't have that many incentives, so you're going to pay the guy either way. Let him take the long way home, put him on ice, and save him for the next few years when you can actually field a competitive team. Looking at the Panthers' schedule, Carolina has tough games sprinkled throughout the year. This is a tough division, and I don't expect the Panthers to win many of those games. Carolina also has games against the Chiefs and the Packers, so overall it's not going to be an easy year for the new-look Panthers. Some betting notes. I wouldn't recommend betting on this team before at least week 10, just to give them some time to become comfortable with all the new moving parts we've been talking about. Also, look hard at betting on them against the Bears, Broncos, and the Washington football team. You might find some value. Moving on to the Atlanta Falcons, it seems like the same story, different year for this team. The worst part of this is just like last year and the year before that, this is a team that was expected to compete for a wild card spot and have a chance once they get to the playoffs, but not anymore. In 2019, Atlanta removed Dan Quinn from his defensive play caller duties, which was a good thing, but left him in as head coach, which was a bad thing. But now in 2020, Dan Quinn has finally been fired altogether, along with GM Thomas Dimitroff. Firing these two was long overdue, and it actually gives me some hope for the Falcons projecting for future seasons. Offensively, in 2020, the Falcons are scoring points, but this hasn't been the same offensive football team since Kyle Shanahan left. Atlanta's outside receivers, Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley, are a hell of a receiving duo, but that's just not enough. And the NFC South in general is wide receiver duo central, with New Orleans, Tampa Bay, and Atlanta all having well above average receiving duos. Chris Trapasso over at CBS Sports agrees with me. The NFC South is hilarious, ranking first in the NFL. The two best receivers in the league right now are both here, Thomas and Julio. Evans and Godwin are each top 10 guys with the talent to break into the top 5. Moore is probably somewhere in the back half of the top 20, and Ridley and Sanders aren't too far behind him. Going back to the O-line, last year was a career high in sack percentage for Ryan. As I mentioned, this offensive line is talented and should be better. Now, I would expect that with some continuity, this line might end up being the catalyst the Falcons need because Matt Ryan still has the skills as a quarterback. Now, if you don't agree with me, I can tell that you're sleeping on Matt Ryan, and let me explain why. There is a lack of quality quarterbacks in this league, and I think Ryan is one of them. Matty Ice has thrown for 4,000 yards or more for 9 straight years. Now, you can't say much about this team except that Matt Ryan is consistent. He's a well above average player, but it's also not surprising that he gets ignored. When your defense plays poorly, your team has a bunch of injuries 2 years in a row, your offensive line play isn't good, and there's internal strife within the coaching staff, you're going to be slept on, and you won't be in the conversation of elite quarterbacks even if you're putting up a 4,000-yard season every year. In NFL.com's recent future, looking at the 10 best quarterbacks when facing pressure, Atlanta's former MVP quarterback was ranked at number 7. Nick Shook breaks it down. No one on this list faced more pressures in 2019 than Ryan's 216. Ryan still posted a passer rating under pressure that was more than 12 points higher than the league average. No one in the NFL owns a higher passer rating under pressure in every season combined since 2016 than Ryan. With a top 10 passer and 2 elite wide receivers, this is an offense that has the ability to come back in games and score points. Now, in 2019, it took a long time for this offense to get off the ground and get chemistry. But after their bye week, the offense started to look better, and the continuation of that is happening in 2020, with the Falcons putting up big points in almost every game so far this season. The real story in 2019 was the defense, and you could say the same things about the 2020 version. The Falcons' D has been turned completely on its heels, showing both an inability to tackle and an inability to cover opposing receivers. Some of this stuff is literally Pop Warner, Pee Wee football type of mistakes. It makes no sense. Any quarterback can see the breakdowns in coverage and toss 60-yard bombs. And nothing seems to be changing, which speaks to coaching more than personnel. According to D. Orlando Ledbetter of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, with 2 horrific fourth quarter collapses, the unit is giving up 36 points per game, which is the highest average in the NFL. The Falcons are giving up 463.3 total yards and 350.3 yards passing, which ranks 31st in the league. The Falcons have also been hit by injuries on all levels of the defense. Along the defensive line, defensive ends Tack McKinley and Charles Harris have missed games. Defensive tackle Marlon Davidson, who was drafted to provide some bulk, made his debut in the Chicago game. Defensive tackle Grady Jarrett left the Chicago game with a hip injury, and defensive end Dante Fowler, the big offseason free agency acquisition, has been playing with an ankle injury. Now that Dan Quinn and Dimitroff are out, it's time to completely clean house. The entire coaching staff needs to go, and a totally new regime needs to be brought in to maximize the final years of Matt Ryan's prime. Now, I'm sorry I don't have more good things to say about the Falcons. I got my undergraduate degree out there, and I almost stayed out there for grad school, so I do have ties to that community, but it's what it is. My final thoughts relate to the schedule. This team's toughest games come after the bye week. The schedule is backloaded like crazy, with New Orleans twice in 3 weeks. The Raiders are tough. The Chargers have an excellent defense. Tampa Bay twice in 3 weeks, and then the Chiefs. I don't see a way Atlanta even gets to 5 wins this year. And the only good thing to come from that is hopefully we see Dan Quinn and the rest of the coaching staff never get another NFL job. One betting note, play the over in every Falcon game where Atlanta is matched up against a below-average offense. There should be some value there. Moving to the top teams in the division, let's start with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Universally, the biggest move of the offseason was the Bucs' acquisition of the greatest quarterback of all time, Tom Brady. Certainly the biggest media splash. I was shocked by the whole thing, really. I thought he was going to stay in free agency until he got the best offer from every other team, and then the Pats would match it plus $1 so he could retire a Patriot. But Brady was determined to get out, and he landed in Tampa Bay with the best offensive weapons he's had in a decade. I mean, he's got truly exceptional weapons in the passing game, along with an up-and-coming defense, Ronald Jones at running back, and a softer conference that doesn't have Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson. I think they have a smart enough coach with a very smart quarterback and the receiving corps to make this work. Steve Makinen of VSiN and the New York Post also points out why Tampa Bay was a good decision. Turnovers were the Bucs' biggest problem. It's no secret. Quarterback Jameis Winston's turnovers almost single-handedly kept Tampa Bay from achieving its potential. Winston threw 30 interceptions last year. Brady has thrown 29 in the last 4 seasons combined. 6 of the Bucs' 9 losses were by a touchdown or less. The Bucs will face a third-place schedule this season. Only 6 of their 16 opponents had winning records. By adding Brady, Tampa Bay's championship odds immediately jumped from 40-1 to 22-1 according to Caesars. The Bucs also brought in the greatest tight end of all time in Rob Gronkowski, out of retirement for Brady's final runs at the chip. Even if Gronk isn't close to his prime, which he's not, adding him makes this a you can't cover everyone on every play type of situation. There are just so many weapons on this offense that this is going to be a decent offensive team no matter how head coach Bruce Arians decides to scheme it. However, in an Arians offense, the quarterback tends to hold the ball a little longer than normal. And considering that Brady works best when he's able to get the ball out quickly, that's going to take some time for it to work for both sides. Arians will have to find a way to scheme for Brady, because obviously the Bucs don't want their 43-year-old quarterback getting hit all the time, especially when the backup option is Blaine Gabbert. It will be interesting to see how much Arians is willing to change his scheme to accommodate Brady's strengths as a passer. Pro Football Talk quotes Rob Ryan speaking on the topic of Arians' offensive scheme. Ryan said that Arians must meet Brady halfway, using plays that are more familiar to Brady and not expecting him to do things he doesn't typically do. Ryan cited the interception that was returned for a touchdown in Week 1, an out route jumped by Saints cornerback Janoris Jenkins. That's not his throw, Ryan said of Brady. He doesn't make those throws. Ryan also said that tight end Rob Gronkowski be moved to the slot more often, or as the case may be, at all, because that's how he was routinely used in New England. I didn't originally like the Brady trade, but enough things have piled up to change my mind. Trading a 4th-round pick for Gronkowski was good, and the Bucs also did well in the draft, drafting a solid O-lineman out of Iowa in Tristan Wirf, safety Antoine Winfield Jr. out of Minnesota, and wide receiver Tyler Johnson, who has been injured but will become a factor as the season goes along, especially with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin trading places every week on the injury report. When you look at the Bucs offseason, there's no question it was excellent. The only loss was defensive end Carl Nassib to the Raiders. Otherwise, the offense is massively upgraded, and their defense with a high ceiling remains mostly intact. Fred Goodall of the Associated Press showcases the Bucs defense. The Bucs front 7 is stuffing the run, as well as disrupting quarterbacks, having increased difficulty solving defensive coordinator Todd Bowles' attacking scheme. 7 different players have at least 1 sack, including Pierre-Paul, who has won in 5 consecutive games dating to last season. Barrett, who paced the league with 19+ in 2019, has 2. So does Sue and rookie safety Antoine Winfield Jr. It's hard to say a lot of bad things about this team, even with the recent loss to the Bears. There are going to be growing pains. And that game was just on national TV, so the whole thing seems magnified. If I were to give all bettors one piece of advice on this team, it would be to not let your bias for or against Tom Brady shape the way you bet on the Buccaneers in 2020. Now, regardless, you still have an old quarterback, and if God forbid something does happen to Brady, then it doesn't matter who their receivers are, because Blaine Gabbert is objectively horrible. If the offensive line stays healthy and the scheme adjusts to Brady's strengths, this is a playoff team with the capability of going deep. Based on Gronk's performance so far in 2020, there's a good chance that he's not going to have a meaningful impact overall, particularly during the regular season. Now, where Gronk will be a factor is in the red zone and as a blocker. Looking at the deep passing threats downfield, the Bucs' dynamic pieces are not a great fit for Brady at this stage of his career. Evans is a baller down the field, a massive mismatch against any CB1. He's tall, long, amazing hands, and fast. All of this means that this is a guy you want to be targeting 20 yards downfield. And Godwin, I think, is an even better all-around receiver and will probably end up being the better of the two in terms of career performance. Having said that, as if it needs to be said again, fade Brady at your own peril. According to Sam Monson at PFF.com, Tom Brady has never been the league's best deep passer. But like everything else in New England, his deep passing suffered from the lack of quality receivers in 2019. Brady's numbers were solid, if not spectacular, and that's with nobody winning at the line on a consistent basis. Transporting him into an offense with some of the best deep targets in football should see him catapulted back into the top 10 in 2020. The whole question is whether this Bucs team can work or not. And at this point in the season, it's just too early to tell. In my opinion, we definitely see playoff appearances and maybe even an NFC title game appearance from a wild card position because of the experienced coach with an experienced quarterback who is not afraid to make meaningful passes in a comeback attempt, especially with the high-octane passing attack. Brady is the most experienced playoff quarterback by far, and it's not even close. Darren Hartwell of NBC Boston goes further. The six-time champion has 41 playoff games played, the most in NFL history by more than a full regular season. Joe Montana is second with 23. Put another way, more than half of the league's 94 active quarterbacks have played in fewer regular season games than Brady has playoff appearances. That's a ridiculous stat. Only Mahomes has a chance of catching him. Now, it's worth pointing out that Todd Bowles has really done a great job with this defensive unit. Remember that last season, the thought was that this was a defense that anyone could score on at will. But to Bowles' credit, the Bucs defense turned out to be closer to average over the course of the season, and their rush defense was top 1 or 2 overall. And considering that there were no meaningful changes to the defense, the continuity is there, and they should be able to continue to build on what took place in 2019. I don't see this as a defense in line for regression, but rather a defense that is going to continue to get better. Final thoughts on the Bucs. This should be a good team, unless Tom is too old and stubborn and tries to run the kind of offense he ran last year, or Arians screws it up, neither of which are likely options in my opinion. Think of it this way. If we clearly know that the Buccaneers can't run the same offense they ran with Jameis, then it's safe to assume that the coach knows the same thing. Finally, looking at their schedule, Tampa Bay has a lot of coin flip games. Packers, maybe the Raiders, Saints, Rams, Chiefs, Vikings are all coin flip games that could go either way. A deeper point on their schedule is that this is a team that should be able to put up close to 30 points every week, and maybe more if Tom is actually making precision passes downfield. One betting recommendation: bet on the Bucs in the second half of every primetime game they're losing, and fade them in the second half of every primetime game they're winning. I'll be betting that way all season. So we're down to the favorite in the division, and one of the teams that will be competing for a championship in 2020, the New Orleans Saints. Now, I'm not going to dwell too long on any of this, but this was a weird offseason for the Saints. Remember, they had the church scandal, Coach Sean Payton got sick, Drew Brees with the kneeling thing. It was just an unusual offseason for the team as a whole. Now, in the midst of all that, the Saints signed a legitimate second receiving option in Emmanuel Sanders. I cannot believe the 49ers let him go. What a get for the Saints, especially considering that Michael Thomas has missed time. Sanders will become a factor as the trust with Drew Brees builds. Pro Football Talk quoted Sanders as saying, "After I caught the touchdown pass, Brees walked up to me and gave me a hug and pretty much said, 'That right there is the icebreaker. We got to build our chemistry.' Unfortunately, we never had OTAs. We really didn't have a true training camp. We missed out on a lot of time even though he came out to Denver and threw with me for 2 days. That doesn't make up for it. So right now we're just trying to gain that chemistry in games and at practice. And I'm just trying to earn his trust game by game and put it on film that I'm open whenever he needs me, and I'm going to catch it whenever he needs me." It's also not surprising that the Saints have had difficulties without Thomas, considering statistically just how big a part of the offense he is. In 2019, Thomas had 185 targets with 149 receptions. Not only is that record-breaking, it's also insane and dangerous when one player is such a huge part of the offensive scheme. You see why it's dangerous with the difficulties the Saints have faced playing without him. New Orleans has won some games, but long-term it's not sustainable. The Saints' struggles speaks to a serious depth issue on the team in general. Remember, only a few years ago, the Saints were in the trash can. The little mini run we've had of the Saints being good the last few years is directly because the team basically hit a home run with every player they drafted 3 years ago. And not just hitting a home run, but hitting a grand slam to win the World Series in the bottom of the ninth with every pick. New Orleans got Ryan Ramczyk, who is an all-pro rock on the offensive line, an absolute stud at running back in Alvin Kamara, the real deal Holyfield blue-chip cornerback in Marshawn Lattimore, and a very, very good safety in Marcus Williams. John Sigler of Saints Wire agrees. The New Orleans Saints hit on nearly all of their picks in the 2017 NFL Draft, adding Rookies of the Year on offense, Kamara, and defense, Lattimore, while also finding a first-team All-Pro, Ramczyk. Other selections, like Marcus Williams and Trey Hendrickson, have contributed often, and the other misses still carry their silver linings. The excellent 2017 draft was more luck than anything else, because the next year, the Saints traded all their draft picks for a pass rusher who is yet to even flash any true first-round talent in Marcus Davenport. That mistake has put pressure on this team because as players are moving on, players are getting older, and because of all that, the Saints are starting to get thin at some key places. Not quarterback, though, because New Orleans has at least the best backup in famous Jameis Winston, but they have huge depth issues on the offensive line. Look at what happened in 2019. A couple guys got hurt, and all of a sudden the Saints had big pressure coming up the middle. And because of that, Brees had even less time, and there's even more pressure on him to throw the ball downfield, which he has not shown the ability to do effectively for a few years now. Des Beeler at the Washington Post gives some stats on Brees so far in 2020. Brees completed 5 passes Monday on 9 attempts that traveled at least 10 yards downfield. But he also threw short of the sticks on 5 of 6 passes attempted on 2nd and 3rd down when the Saints needed at least 10 yards for a first down. In the Saints' first game, he completed just 2 of 7 passes thrown 10-plus yards downfield, with none of those passes classified as accurate. Overall, PFF has Brees ranked as the NFL's lowest graded passer on throws of at least 10 yards. Having said that, just because Brees has a noodle arm does not mean the Saints can't win at least 10 games, especially when they have so much continuity at the head coach and offensive coordinator positions. This is Sean Payton's 14th year as the Saints head coach, and he's been with current offensive coordinator Pete Carmichael since the beginning. This is also the 5th year for Saints defensive coordinator Dennis Allen. The continuity of the Saints should play an even bigger role than normal in 2020 because of the current situation in our country. The team also picked up veteran Malcolm Jenkins in free agency. And while Jenkins isn't the same player he once was, he's still a top 20 safety and a veteran leader with a championship under his belt. The Saints are projected to win the division, as well as being a favorite to win at least 10 games. Similar to Tampa Bay, they have an old quarterback, except Brees is definitely washed. If Brees gets hurt, things change definitely, but unlike the Bucs, New Orleans has a proven veteran quarterback in Jameis Winston, so it's much less of a disaster, which is why the Saints get the edge overall. Mike Triplett of ESPN discusses Winston's changes heading into this season. The 26-year-old began the offseason by having LASIK surgery. He also decided to change his diet and exercise routine and said he now weighs 225 pounds, the lowest of his pro career. Most dramatic of all, he decided to accept a one-year deal with the Saints worth just $1.1 million plus incentives so that he could receive a Harvard education in quarterback school. How many of you didn't know about the LASIK surgery? I read somewhere that Jameis was talking about how he can read street signs now. That's crazy. Now, defensively, this unit is between 10th and 15th, with the ceiling of just cracking into the top 10. As of right now, their front four is strong, their second unit is terrible, and their third unit is even worse. And the Saints are counting on their great coaches to coach up the second and third units and make them usable. With Marcus Davenport just coming back due to injury, and rookie Trey Hendrickson dealing with an ankle, this puts even more pressure on a weak linebacking core that got exposed in a few games last year, most notably against George Kittle and the San Francisco 49ers in that amazing regular season game. Some final thoughts on the Saints. This is a well-coached team with talent all over that will definitely score points. Looking at the schedule, the stretch from Week 9 to Week 16 is really going to test this team, and we could easily see the Saints take themselves out of contention for the number 1 seed during this period. The first 8 weeks of their schedule is the easiest part, and having already lost games against the Raiders and Packers, this puts even more pressure on the team later in the year. Weeks 9 through 16, the Saints will be lucky to come out of it at 4-4. They get Tampa Bay coming off a back-to-back, followed by the 49ers coming off Thursday Night Football, which means extra rest for San Francisco. Atlanta coming off their bye. Saints travel to Denver, then Atlanta again off the back-to-back. Then they get a home game against guess who? The Chiefs, followed by a late-season Vikings team who beat New Orleans last year. One betting note. If the Saints win out heading into their bye, I recommend hammering Tampa Bay to win the division at a big number. I'm really hoping that the Saints go into their bye with a winning record. If they do, it's wise guy time, and I'll have Godzilla bets on the Bucs to win the division, and so should you. If you've listened to the information I've given you throughout the video, you now know how to bet on the NFC South from Week 1 through the playoffs. You also know how to attack the NFL betting market in 2020, and you know how to pick the right spots to make money on each team. Now, I definitely want to know what you think about my projections for these teams. Whether you think I'm totally crazy and you completely disagree with everything I said, or I gave you some good information that helped you win some bets, please let me know in the comments. I'll make sure and respond. Also, consider heading over to my website, aosportspicks.com, and sign up for a sports betting package where you can get my picks each week. Finally, make sure and subscribe to this channel. Hit the like button and click the notification bell so you get notified whenever I release a new video. Doing that really helps me, and it also helps the channel get placed higher in the YouTube search results so more people can see this content and the channel grows. Once again, I'm Alpha Omega. See you next time.